Welcome to this video which gives details on how to conduct a safety risk assessment. Whether you are a safety officer, safety manager, an HSE professional, a safety trainer, a small business owner trying to comply with the safety regulations, or a student building skills, this video is for you. Before we continue, if you are new to our channel, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. We've all been there. Maybe it's skipping a step on a ladder because we're in a hurry. Maybe it's ignoring a nagging feeling that something ain't right. Or maybe it's just figuring, it won't happen to me. Complacency. It's a silent threat, lurking in the shadows of even the most well-intentioned workplaces. But complacency can have a hefty price tag. Suddenly, what seemed like just another day becomes a tragedy etched in the minds of workers, families, and communities. We're not talking about living in a bubble wrapped in bubble wrap. We're talking about respect, because the truth is, every worker deserves to go home safe and sound at the end of the day. Let's be clear. Workplace safety isn't just about avoiding a slap on the wrist from OSHA, HSE UK, or other safety regulatory agencies. It's about protecting lives and well-being of workers, interested parties, and the general public. Every year, countless workers face preventable injuries and fatalities. From slips, trips, and falls to hazardous materials and machinery mishaps, safety must be ingrained in every organization. Now, you might be thinking, okay, safety is important, but where do we even begin? That's where risk assessment comes in. Think of it as your roadmap to a safer workplace. It's a systematic process of identifying potential hazards, evaluating the risks they pose, and then taking steps to eliminate or control those risks. It's about being proactive, not reactive. Imagine you're about to embark on a road trip. You wouldn't just hop in the car and start driving without first checking the route, right? You'd look for potential road closures, construction zones, or areas with high traffic. You'd plan your route accordingly, maybe even taking alternative roads to avoid potential hazards. That's essentially what risk assessment is, planning your route to a safer workplace. By identifying potential hazards before they turn into incidents, you're taking control of your work environment and creating a safer space for everyone. It's about being aware of the risks, understanding their potential impact, and taking steps to mitigate them effectively. Risk assessment isn't a one-time activity, but an ongoing process that evolves with your workplace. As new equipment is introduced, processes change, or new hazards emerge, your risk assessment needs to adapt to reflect these changes. It's about staying one step ahead, constantly evaluating, and continuously improving your safety measures. Now, I know what you might be thinking. This risk assessment stuff sounds complicated, but here's the good news: it doesn't have to be. You don't need a fancy degree or a team of consultants to conduct a thorough risk assessment. It's about common sense, observation, and a willingness to prioritize safety. Whether you run a small mom-and-pop shop or a large manufacturing plant, the principles of risk assessment remain the same. It's about looking at your workplace through a safety lens, identifying potential hazards, and taking practical steps to control the risks. This video is designed to be your go-to resource for mastering safety risk assessment, regardless of your industry or the size of your operation. We'll break down the process into manageable steps, providing you with the tools, templates, and real-world examples you need to implement effective risk assessments in your workplace. We'll demystify the jargon, cut through the complexity, and empower you to create a safer work environment for yourself and your team. Before we dive headfirst into the nitty-gritty of risk assessment, let's make sure we're all speaking the same language. We're going to toss around some terms that might sound like common sense, but trust me, getting crystal clear on these definitions is like laying the foundation for a sturdy house. You have to get the base right for the rest of the building to stand strong. Below are the key terms and definitions you need to master when conducting a safety risk assessment. First up, we got hazards. Think of hazards as anything with the potential to cause harm. Examples could be a slippery floor, a faulty piece of equipment, a chemical spill, even stress from work overload, biological agents like the coronavirus, etc. They're like those potholes in the road. Gotta spot them before you hit them. Next, we got risks. Risk is the likelihood that a hazard will actually cause harm and how severe that harm could be. So, a pothole on a busy highway during rush hour? High risk. A pothole on a deserted dirt road? Low risk. See the difference? Finally, control measures are your safety net, your plan of attack to eliminate or minimize those risks. In the case of the potholes, examples of control measures may be guardrails around that pothole, barricades, barriers, warning signs, frequent inspection and timely maintenance of the roads, or even rerouting traffic altogether. Control measures are how we take charge and protect ourselves, our coworkers, relevant parties, and the general public. Getting a grip on these basic terms is like learning the ABCs of safety. It's the foundation for everything we're going to cover in this safety risk assessment guide, so keep them in mind as we move forward, and remember, when it comes to workplace safety, clear communication is key. Now let's talk about the law. I know, nobody likes dealing with rules and regulations, but here's the thing. When it comes to workplace safety, the law is actually your friend. It's there to protect you, your coworkers, your business, and other relevant stakeholders that interact within the environment your business operates. See, throughout history, there have been countless instances where workers were put in harm's way because employers cut corners or simply didn't prioritize safety. That's why governments around the world have stepped in to establish laws and regulations that set minimum standards for workplace safety. In the United States, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, is the big dog on campus. The Health and Safety Executive, HSE UK, is the body for enforcing such laws in the United Kingdom. In Canada, we have the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety, CCOHS. In the EU, we have the European Agency for Safety and Health at Work. In Australia, we have the Safe Work Australia. In New Zealand, we have the WorkSafe New Zealand, etc. These are the bodies and agencies which set and enforce safety standards across a wide range of industries in many countries. For instance, in the United States of America, from fall protection to hazard communication to machine guarding, OSHA regulations cover a lot of ground. Now, I'm not gonna lie, navigating the world of OSHA regulations can feel like wading through a swamp sometimes. But the good news is there are tons of resources available to help you make sense of it all. OSHA's website is a treasure trove of information, and there are plenty of organizations that offer training and guidance on complying with safety regulations. The main takeaway here is this. Understanding and complying with safety regulations is not just about avoiding fines or penalties, it's about creating a work environment where everyone goes home safe and sound at the end of the day. Most of the bodies and agencies we mentioned above provide detailed guidelines on how to conduct and manage different risks in the workplace. That said, let's break down risk assessment into 5 simple steps. Step 1, identify the hazards. Step 2, assess the risks. Step 3, control the risks. Step 4, implement control measures. Step 5, review and improve. Regularly review and improve your risk assessments. It is very important that you note down the above 5 steps on how to conduct a risk assessment, particularly if you, a safety professional, as you will need them daily at your workplace as you strive to keep man, machine, equipment, and the work environment safe. But who should conduct risk assessment? No crystal ball required. You just need to think like a risk assessor. Now you might be thinking, this all sounds great, but I'm not a safety expert. How am I supposed to know what to look for? Well, here's the good news. You don't need a fancy degree or years of experience to think like a risk assessor. It's all about common sense, observation, and a little bit of imagination. Start by putting yourself in the shoes of your workers. Walk through their daily routines, pay attention to the tasks they perform, and consider the tools and equipment they use. Ask yourself, what could go wrong here? What are the potential sources of harm? Don't just focus on the obvious hazards. Think about the less obvious ones too. Are there any ergonomic risks like awkward postures or repetitive motions? What about psychosocial hazards like stress, fatigue, or workplace violence? Remember, a good risk assessor is like a detective, always on the lookout for clues that could indicate a potential hazard. Train your eye to spot things like frayed electrical cords, cluttered walkways, or unguarded machinery. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Talk to your workers, get their input, and listen to their concerns. They're the ones on the front lines, so they're often the first to notice potential hazards. So the good rule of thumbs here is to remember the acronym MEEPS when conducting risk assessment. MEEPS stands for Material, Environment, Equipment, People and Systems Present at the Workplace. Ask yourself what can go wrong with each of the elements of MEEPS. Your answers will be the hazards. Once you have identified the hazards, you need to ask yourself who can be harmed by the identified hazards. How can they be harmed? These questions will train you to be a master in hazard identification. Documenting your due diligence. Keeping records for safety's sake. Documentation is key when it comes to risk assessment. It's about creating a record of your due diligence. Think of your risk assessment documentation as your safety Bible. It should be readily available to anyone who needs it. Find a system that works for you and stick with it. Beyond the checklist, risk assessment as a living, breathing process. Risk assessment isn't a one-time task. It's an ongoing process of identifying, assessing, controlling, and reviewing hazards. Stay vigilant, adapt to changes, and strive for a safer workplace. Encourage reporting of hazards and near misses. Make safety everyone's responsibility. Regularly review and update your risk assessments. Manage risks to an acceptable level and continuously improve safety. Alright, let's dive into the heart of the matter, identifying hazards. This is where the rubber meets the road in risk assessment. You can have all the fancy forms and procedures in the world, but if you're not spotting the dangers in the first place, you're already behind the 8 ball. Think of hazard identification like looking both ways before you cross the street. You have to be aware of what's coming at you from all directions, or you might get blindsided. Same goes for the workplace. Whether it's a construction site, a factory floor, or an office cubicle, every work environment has its own unique set of potential dangers. The problem is, hazards aren't always obvious. They can be sneaky, hiding in plain sight, blending in with the everyday routine until, bam, they rear their ugly heads. That's why we have to train ourselves to see beyond the surface, to develop an eye for potential risks before they turn into real problems. Remember, the more hazards you can identify, the better equipped you'll be to assess the risks and put control measures in place. It's about being proactive, not reactive. So let's ditch the "it'll never happen here" mentality and approach hazard identification with eyes wide open. Every workplace has common hazards. Physical hazards cause immediate injury. Think slips, trips, falls, and machinery. Chemical hazards are silent but deadly. Different liquid, solid, and gaseous chemicals in the workplace fall under this category. Biological hazards make you sick. They constitute microorganisms like bacterial, viruses, germs, fungi, infectious fluids, etc. Ergonomic hazards cause musculoskeletal disorders. Psychosocial hazards affect mental well-being. Identify these usual suspects in your workplace. To identify these hazards, a safety checklist can be used. You can review safety manuals, incident data, complaint registers, etc. Now here's the thing about hazards. They're not always as obvious as a banana peel on the floor. Some hazards are like ninjas, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. One type of hidden hazard is the long-term exposure hazard. These are the ones that might not cause immediate harm, but over time they can slowly chip away at your health. Like exposure to low levels of chemicals, radiation, or noise. Think asbestos in old buildings, silica dust from cutting concrete, or even just prolonged exposure to loud traffic noise if you work near a busy road. Then there are the infrequently used equipment hazards. That piece of machinery in the corner that only gets used once a month. It might be out of sight, out of mind, but that doesn't mean it's not a hazard. In fact, infrequently used equipment can be even more dangerous because it might not get the same level of maintenance and inspection as equipment that's used every day. Don't forget about the temporary worksite hazards, construction sites, roadwork zones, even just setting up for a conference. These temporary setups often come with their own unique set of hazards that might not be present in a permanent workplace. Think uneven ground, exposed electrical cords, traffic moving through the work area, or even just the stress of working in a new and unfamiliar environment. And finally, we have to talk about the "it's always been this way" hazard. This is the insidious one, the one that can blind us to potential dangers simply because we've become so accustomed to them. Just because something's been done a certain way for years doesn't mean it's safe. Don't be afraid to question the status quo and look for ways to improve safety, even if it means changing long-standing practices. Tools of the trade methods for identifying hazards. Let's talk about tools and techniques to uncover hazards. Think of these like your hazard hunting toolkit. Walkthrough inspections are effective. Use a checklist to cover all bases. Job safety analysis breaks down tasks. Talk to workers, they know best. Investigate accidents to learn and prevent. Don't be shy, speak up. The power of employee feedback. Employees are your most valuable resource for identifying hazards. They see and feel things you might miss. Create a culture where they feel comfortable speaking up without fear. Establish open communication, actively solicit feedback and listen. Implement a simple system for reporting hazards. Acknowledge concerns, take action, and show that safety is a priority. Empower employees to participate in hazard identification. Build a safer, stronger, and more engaged workforce. Learning from the past, accident investigation, and hazard identification. Accidents happen, but each one is a chance to learn and prevent future incidents. Investigate thoroughly, identify root causes, and improve safety measures. Don't play the blame game, focus on solutions. Use findings to enhance your safety program. Learn from past accidents to prevent future ones. Create a safer workplace for everyone. Alright, so we've identified our hazards like a boss, we know what we're dealing with. But now comes the real head-scratcher. How big of a threat do these hazards actually pose? That's where risk evaluation steps in. Like a referee sizing up two fighters before the bell rings. You see, not all hazards are created equal. Some are like paper tigers, scary-looking but ultimately harmless. Others are more like sleeping giants, quiet and unassuming until they wake up and wreak havoc. Risk evaluation helps us separate the contenders from the pretenders, the real threats from the perceived ones. It's about digging a little deeper, asking ourselves some tough questions. How likely is it that this hazard will actually cause harm? And if it does, how bad could it be? Is it a minor scrape and a bruised ego? Or are we talking a trip to the ER or worse? By answering these questions, we can start to prioritize our efforts, focusing our time, energy, and resources on the hazards that pose the greatest risk to our workers and our business. Because here's the thing, we can't eliminate every single hazard. That's just not realistic. But we can manage them effectively, and that starts with understanding which ones deserve our immediate attention. Now, when it comes to risk evaluation, there's one tool that stands head and shoulders above the rest, the risk matrix. Think of it like a report card for your hazards, giving each one a grade based on its likelihood and severity. The beauty of the risk matrix is its simplicity. It takes two key factors, likelihood and severity, and combines them into a visual representation of risk that's easy to understand and even easier to use. On one axis, we have likelihood, or the probability that a hazard will actually cause harm. This is typically rated on a scale from rare to almost certain, with several levels in between. On the other axis we have severity, or the potential consequences if the hazard were to occur. This is also rated on a scale, often from insignificant to catastrophic. By plotting your hazards on the risk matrix based on their likelihood and severity, you get a clear picture of their overall risk level. The higher up and to the right a hazard falls on the matrix, the greater the risk it poses. Now, the exact scales and terminology used in a risk matrix can vary depending on the industry and the organization. But the basic principle remains the same, to provide a simple visual way to compare and prioritize hazards based on their potential impact. Alright, so we got our risk matrix all set up, ready to start grading our hazards. But here's the catch. How do we actually determine the likelihood and severity of each hazard? Well, that's where risk assessment methods come in. Think of these as your hazard assessment weapons, each with its own strengths and weaknesses. One approach is qualitative risk assessment. This is like the detective work of hazard assessment, relying on observation, experience, and judgment to make subjective evaluations of likelihood and severity. It's often used when data is limited or when you need to make quick assessments in the field. The other approach is quantitative risk assessment. This is the more scientific approach, using data, statistics, and mathematical models to calculate risk numerically. It's often used when you have access to historical data, industry standards, or sophisticated risk modeling software. So, which approach is right for you? Well, like most things in life, it depends. If you're short on time and data, qualitative assessment might be the way to go. If you've got the resources and the need for precision, quantitative assessment might be the better option. Of course, you can always use a combination of both approaches, complementing your subjective judgments with objective data whenever possible. The key is to choose the methods that best suit your needs, your resources, and the specific hazards you're assessing. From data to action, turning assessment into actionable insights. Okay, so we've identified our hazards, evaluated their risks, and maybe even given them grades on our fancy risk matrix. Now what? Well, here's the thing. Risk assessment isn't just about filling out forms and checking boxes, it's about taking action to make our workplaces safer. The information we gather during the risk evaluation process shouldn't just sit on a shelf collecting dust. It should be used to drive decision-making, prioritize resources, and implement effective control measures. Think of it like this. Your risk assessment is like a roadmap, highlighting the potential hazards and risky areas in your workplace. But it's up to you to use that roadmap to navigate your way to a safer destination. Start by focusing on the hazards that pose the greatest risk, the ones that scored high on your risk matrix. These are the ones that deserve your immediate attention. Then consider your control options. Remember the hierarchy of controls? Start at the top with elimination and substitution, working your way down to engineering controls, administrative controls, and, as a last resort, personal protective equipment, PPE. The key is to choose control measures that are feasible, effective, and sustainable over the long term. And don't forget to involve your workers in this process. They're the ones who know the work best, and they often have valuable insights into what will and won't work. Documenting the danger, creating a risk register. Keep track of risks in a clear, concise, and accessible format. Think of it like a hazard logbook, a centralized repository. This is often referred to as a risk register. It can be a simple spreadsheet, database, or binder. Include hazard descriptions, risk levels, control measures, responsible parties, and review dates. Maintain an up-to-date risk register to demonstrate commitment to workplace safety. The hierarchy of controls, your safety game plan. Alright, so we've identified our hazards, sized them up, and even given them grades. Now it's time to talk about the fun part, kicking those hazards to the curb. And when it comes to controlling risks in the workplace, we've got a game plan, the hierarchy of controls. Think of the hierarchy of controls like a pyramid, with the most effective control measures at the top and the least effective at the bottom. Our goal is to start at the top and work our way down, implementing the highest level of control that's feasible for each hazard we've identified. Why a pyramid? Well, just like a pyramid is strongest at its base, the hierarchy of controls is strongest when we start with the most effective measures and only rely on the lower levels as backups or supplements. Now, I'm not going to lie, implementing higher-level controls often takes more time, effort, and resources up front. But trust me, it's an investment that pays off in the long run, resulting in a safer, healthier, and more productive workplace for everyone. Elimination and substitution, taking hazards out of the game. At the top of our hierarchy of controls, we've got elimination and substitution. These are the superheroes of hazard control, removing or replacing hazards. Elimination means getting rid of the hazard altogether. No hazard, no risk. It's like taking a weed whacker to a dandelion. For instance, if the use of a chemical is too dangerous, such as causing cancer to workers, then it is recommended to eliminate the use of the chemicals. Also, the cancer-causing chemical may be substituted with a chemical that is less harmful and whose risks can be controlled. If elimination isn't feasible, use substitution. Find a safer alternative to do the same job. Engineering controls, building a safer playing field. Alright, so we've swung for the fences with elimination and substitution, but sometimes those options just aren't in the cards. That's when we move down to the next level of our hierarchy of controls, engineering controls. Think of engineering controls like building safety right into the workplace itself. It's about modifying the environment, the equipment, or the process to reduce or eliminate exposure to hazards. It's like installing guardrails on a treacherous mountain path. You're not eliminating the cliff, but you're making it a whole lot harder to fall off. Engineering controls come in all shapes and sizes, but here are a few common examples. Machine guarding. Installing physical barriers, interlocks, or light curtains to prevent workers from contacting moving parts on machinery. Ventilation systems. Using local exhaust ventilation to capture and remove airborne contaminants such as dust, fumes, or vapors at their source. Noise control. Enclosing noisy equipment using sound-absorbing materials, or implementing quieter work practices to reduce noise levels. Ergonomic design. Designing workstations, tools, and equipment to fit the worker, reducing the risk of musculoskeletal disorders. The beauty of engineering controls is that they're often built-in and automated, meaning they don't rely on worker behavior or compliance to be effective. They're like the silent guardians of the workplace, working behind the scenes to keep everyone safe. Administrative controls setting the rules for safety. Alright, so we've eliminated what we can, substituted where possible, and engineered our hearts out. But sometimes, even with all that, we still need an extra layer of protection. That's where administrative controls come in, like the rule book for working safely. Administrative controls are all about changing the way work is done, rather than changing the workplace itself. It's about establishing procedures, policies, and training programs that help workers stay safe on the job. Think of it like this. Engineering controls are the guardrails, and administrative controls are the signs that say, "Caution, steep cliff." Here are a few examples of administrative controls. Safety training. Providing workers with the knowledge and skills they need to identify hazards, work safely, and respond appropriately in an emergency. Safe work procedures. Developing step-by-step instructions for performing tasks safely, including hazard identification, risk assessment, and control measures. Work permits. Implementing a permit system for high-risk activities, such as working at heights, confined spaces entry, or hot work to ensure hazards are identified and controlled before work begins. Job rotation. Rotating workers between different tasks or workstations to reduce exposure to repetitive motions, awkward postures, or other ergonomic hazards. Now here's the thing about administrative controls. They're only as effective as the people implementing and following them. That's why it's crucial to provide thorough training, clear communication, and consistent enforcement of safety rules and procedures. Personal protective equipment, PPE. Suiting up for safety. Alright, we're reaching the bottom of our hierarchy of controls pyramid, which means it's time to talk about the last line of defense, personal protective equipment, or PPE for short. Now before we go any further, let me be clear, PPE is important, but it should never be the first line of defense. Why? Because PPE only protects the wearer and only if it's worn correctly, which let's face it, isn't always a guarantee. Think of it like this. Would you rather prevent a car accident by hitting the brakes or by relying on your airbag to save you? PPE is like the airbag. It's there for when things go wrong, but it's not a substitute for preventing the accident in the first place. That being said, PPE plays a crucial role in many workplaces, especially when hazards can't be completely eliminated or controlled by other means. It's like the armor we wear into battle, protecting us from the hazards we can't avoid. But remember, PPE is only effective if it's selected correctly, the right type of PPE for the specific hazards present, fitted properly, PPE that fits comfortably and correctly to provide adequate protection, worn consistently. PPE must be worn at all times when exposed to the hazard, maintained properly. PPE should be inspected regularly and replaced when damaged or worn out. Case study, a winning strategy for control implementation. Let's bring this all together with a real-world example of the hierarchy of controls. In a metal parts manufacturing facility, exposure to metal shavings and dust is a hazard. We apply the hierarchy of controls: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and PPE. Start at the top and work down, implementing the highest level of control that's practical and effective. Preparation is key. Before diving in, ensure proper preparation. Define the scope and gather intel. Assemble a diverse team. Ensure everyone's on the same page. A well-informed team is a safer team. Boots on the ground. Conducting the risk assessment. Alright team, we're geared up, briefed, and ready to rock. Time to put those boots on the ground and identify hazards like bloodhounds on the hunt. This is where the rubber meets the road, folks. Observe tasks, talk to workers, and remember, no detail is too small. Those minor issues can be early warning signs of bigger problems. Divide the work area into manageable chunks. Stay organized and avoid getting overwhelmed. Look for anything that could cause harm. Ask questions, get workers' perspectives, and listen to their concerns. They're in the trenches every day. They often have insights we wouldn't think to ask about. Look for hidden hazards, long-term exposures, and temporary worksite dangers. This is our chance to flush them out. Identify long-term exposures and infrequently used equipment. Address those "it's always been this way" situations. Ensure we aren't blinded to potential dangers. From brainstorm to blueprint, developing control measures. We've identified our hazards, we've assessed the risks, and we've got a pretty good understanding of what we're up against. Now it's time to put on our thinking caps and come up with a plan of attack. It's time to develop those control measures that will keep our workers safe and our workplace humming like a well-oiled machine. This is where the hierarchy of controls becomes our trusty roadmap, guiding us toward the most effective solutions for each hazard we've identified. Remember, our goal is to start at the top of that pyramid, elimination and substitution, and work our way down only if necessary. For each hazard, we're going to brainstorm a range of control options considering their feasibility, effectiveness, and sustainability. This is a team effort, folks. We need input from everyone, workers, supervisors, engineers, safety professionals, to come up with the best solutions. Sometimes the best control measures are the simplest ones. A well-placed guardrail, a clearly marked walkway, a regular cleaning schedule. These seemingly small changes can make a big difference in preventing accidents and injuries. Other times, we might need to get a little more creative, thinking outside the box to come up with innovative solutions. Maybe we need to redesign a workstation for better ergonomics, automate a process to reduce manual handling, or implement a job rotation schedule to minimize exposure to repetitive tasks. Putting pen to paper. Documenting your risk assessment. We've identified hazards, assessed risks, and developed control measures. But if it ain't documented, it didn't happen. Documentation is the backbone of a solid risk assessment. It protects your workers and your business. Use templates and software to simplify the process. Find a system that works for you and stick with it. Keeping it real, a sample risk assessment in action. Let's bring this home with a real-world example of a risk assessment. We're at a facility producing metal parts focusing on operating a metal-cutting saw. Our team includes a supervisor, saw operator, maintenance technician, and safety representative. We observe the task, note hazards, and talk to the saw operator. Hazard: contact with the saw blade. Severity: catastrophic. Control measures: saw guard, safety interlocks, push sticks, blade guard inspection, and training. Document everything on the risk assessment form. Most importantly, ensure workers and all relevant parties are communicated on the assessed risk, and the records of communication are well maintained. These records will help to demonstrate compliance where required. By following these steps, we've conducted a thorough risk assessment and developed a plan to protect our workers. The never-ending story: why review is non-negotiable. Alright folks, we've made it to the final chapter of our risk assessment saga, but here's the catch. This ain't your typical happily ever after story. Why? Because when it comes to workplace safety, the story never really ends. It's an ongoing journey, a continuous loop of assessing, controlling, evaluating, and improving, and at the heart of it all is the importance of regular review. Think of it like this. Remember that dusty old risk assessment you found on the shelf, the one with the coffee stains and the faded ink? Yeah, that is not going to do you much good today. The workplace is a dynamic environment, constantly evolving, adapting, and throwing curveballs our way. New equipment, new processes, new materials, even new regulations. All these changes can introduce new hazards or alter existing ones. That's why simply conducting a risk assessment and calling it a day just isn't going to be enough. We have to treat risk assessment like a living, breathing document, something we revisit regularly, tweaking and adjusting as needed to keep pace with the ever-changing workplace landscape. Regular review helps us catch those subtle shifts, those creeping changes that might otherwise go unnoticed until something bad happens. It's about staying one step ahead of the game, anticipating potential problems before they turn into real headaches. Knowing when to hit the refresh button. Regular reviews are crucial, but how often? There's no one-size-fits-all answer. It depends on your work's nature and risk level. Trigger points like accidents or near misses demand reviews. Also, significant changes or new regulations require reassessment. Culture Club. Building a safety mindset from the ground up. It's about creating a culture of safety, where everyone feels empowered to speak up about hazards and contribute to making the workplace safer. Building this culture takes time, effort, and commitment from everyone involved. Empower employees to participate in risk assessments and provide feedback. Open communication is key. Celebrate successes to reinforce the importance of safety. Real-world wins. When risk assessment makes a real difference. Risk assessment can be the difference between life and death. I've seen lives saved and families spared heartache because of it. Let's embrace it, be proactive, and ensure everyone goes home safe. Safer workplaces, stronger nation, the enduring legacy of risk assessment. Safety risk assessment is about identifying hazards and implementing control measures. It's about ensuring everyone returns home safe. Respect for the work, respect for the risks, and respect for the human beings. Every worker deserves to go home safe and sound. Let's keep learning, improving, and striving for a safer future. If you are new to our channel, share, comment, and subscribe. Stay safe and see you in our next video.